This is a 2018 Lexus LS 500h, and it is the flagship Lexus sedan, the most expensive luxury sedan Lexus has ever made. The sticker price on this one is just a hair over $120,000, which may seem like a lot of money for a Lexus, but today I'm going to show you why it's worth it. I've borrowed this LS 500h from Lexus of Seattle, which is a giant Lexus dealer here in the Seattle area, and they have every NX and RX and IS and GX that you can think of, but the Lexus I wanted to check out most was this one, the all-new LS, which is entering its 5th generation for the 2018 model year. Today, I'm going to show you around it. To do that, I'm going to start at the beginning. This is an original 1990 Lexus LS 400, the first LS. This one is in pristine condition with only 38,000 miles on it. This is the car that launched the Lexus brand. This was the LS 30 years ago. This is the car that convinced people that some upstart Japanese brand could compete with real luxury brands like Mercedes-Benz, Jaguar, and BMW. Now, I'm going to review that LS 400 separately, and you'll see it in a few weeks, but today I'm going to show you what it has evolved into. Now, the base price of that LS 400 back in 1990 was just $36,000, which translates into roughly $69,000 in today's money. By comparison, the new LS starts at $79,000, and this one is just a hair over $120,000. They've gotten a lot more expensive, but then again, it's also gotten a lot better. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of the 2018 LS 500h, and I'm going to show you all of its cool features and interesting quirks. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the new LS, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of some older Lexus models you've probably forgotten about by now. Now, I'm going to show you all of the quirks and features of the LS, just like always, but I want to start with some of the crazier ones, and that means starting with price. Now, I mentioned before the LS starts around $79,000. This is the hybrid one, so it starts around $83,000, so you might be wondering, well, how did it get up to $120,000? Well, that would be the executive package, which is a $23,000 option package. It includes a wide range of luxury accessories I will show you throughout this video, but I'm going to start with my favorite. That would be on the door panel, and specifically the glass trim. This car doesn't have stupid boring wood or aluminum or carbon fiber. Lexus has moved past all that. This has glass trim, and just look at it. It's beautiful. It looks really cool and special and exciting. They also have it on the front door panels. Lexus calls this Kirko glass trim, some sort of Japanese glass, and it is absolutely gorgeous. And the door panel craziness isn't over yet. I turn your attention next to the glass trim to this cloth. Well, that's not just cloth. Lexus calls that hand-pleated interior trim. It's actually hand-folded cloth that makes up this pattern, and it makes the door panel look absolutely beautiful, especially when combined with the glass. This isn't just your typical leather and stitching like you get on a lot of luxury car door panels. It goes well beyond that. The craftsmanship is absolutely beautiful, very much in line with what you'd expect as part of a $23,000 option package. But the door trim isn't the only thing the executive package does, far from it. It also ensures that rear seat passengers are absolutely pampered back here. Check this out. The rear seats can move electronically. That's not all that surprising. The surprising thing is there's no buttons. There's no buttons on the side of the seats. There's no buttons on the door. So how do you move them? Through the screen. You got to go into seat, and only then can you move the seats around. Now, I have been in a lot of cars and back seats that move, and I've never seen screen-only rear seat controls. But there's much more craziness in the rear seats and the fact that they're only controllable with this touchscreen. One other interesting item is there are memory settings back here, memory settings for the rear seat, not just the front seats, but the back. That is something you probably won't see very often. But even crazier than that is the recline function. Check this out. Push a little button on the touchscreen, and then the front seat starts sort of whirring forward, all the way forward, as far forward as it can go. And it takes quite a while because there's a lot of room to cover. Once it's finally in its furthest forward position, then the rear passenger seat, the one I'm sitting in, starts reclining itself into a far more comfortable position, so you can almost lay down back here while you're being driven around in your car. Anyway, while that rear screen is crazy, this car has a lot of screens. I'll get back to that one in a second, but first, I want to show you another screen-related item that is quite interesting. Push a little button to the left of the steering with a little camera on it, and then the camera system comes up, and it's one of these cameras that sort of shows the outside of the car, just like I showed you in the BMW M760 and the Rolls-Royce Phantom. It isn't as comprehensive as the BMW camera, but it is still pretty cool. The interesting thing about this camera, though, is it allows you to change the color of your car as it is represented in the camera. Let's say you got a gray LS and you always wish you had gotten a white one. Well, you can make the car in your camera appear white. Maybe you're feeling a little frisky and you want to change it to red. Well, then your on-camera LS can be red. So you don't have to look at the wrong color car, and you can change your car's in-camera color to whatever you prefer. And speaking of screens, another absolutely amazing feature of this car is the heads-up display. Now, heads-up displays are pretty common. They basically project vital information about the car onto the windshield in front of you, so you don't have to look down to see, for example, the speed you're going or the radio station you're listening to. Pretty common. But this one also gives you the speed limit of the road you're on. That too is surprisingly common, but this heads-up display also recognizes stop signs, and it'll flash a little stop sign in the heads-up display when you're approaching one, just so you won't miss it. That is not common, but it gets better. Take a look at this. When you get to an intersection, the LS will sense whether there is a vehicle approaching from either side of you, and if it is, the heads-up display will actually display with orange arrows the direction the vehicle is traveling, so you know to look that way before pulling out, so you don't accidentally pull out into its path. When it's clear, there are no arrows, and when cars are coming, the arrows appear, so you know there's a car coming. That is a truly amazing feature I've never seen on any other car, but I suspect it's going to become pretty common pretty quickly. But back to that rear screen, because the rear really is a wonderful place to be in this car. Now, I should mention that screen isn't always displayed. If you're sitting in back, you really want to be in one of the two outer seats because they're more comfortable and more plush, but there is a middle seat. However, if you don't have someone in the middle, you just put down the center armrest, and then the screen appears. There are many different things you can control using the screen. For example, go into audio and you can change what the entire car is listening to from the back seat. So if you don't want to listen to what the driver's listening to, well, you don't have to. Obviously, the driver can also lock the rear passengers out from having that control. If you go into climate, you will see that there are a lot of different climate control settings. This car has quad zone climate control, and so each passenger can adjust their own temperature to their liking. And obviously, this car has heated and cooled rear seats, and maybe more impressively, it has automatic rear seats. If you just press auto and you set the climate control to a certain temperature, the heated and cooled seats will sort of turn on and off to try to get you to that temperature automatically. You don't even have to adjust them, and that is pretty cool. Next up, you can go into relaxation, and you can get a massage while you're being driven down the road. And old massaging seats were just like these little things in the back of the seat that would kind of come up and push on you. This is way better than that. It almost actually feels like a massage. You can choose between 7 different settings, including full body stretch and full body refresh, and there's even a spot heater. So as the car is tending to your aching body, it can also apply heat to certain pressure points or whatever to make you feel more comfortable. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Obviously, you go into shade and lamp. You can close and open the rear sunshade, which just sort of whirs up like it does in every other car. You can close and open the sunshade on the doors, which isn't that impressive, although it does have a little sunshade for the little window in the back part of the door. And you can turn on and off the lamps above you. You can also simply press the button above you to turn on and off the lamps, but why would you bother raising your hand to the ceiling when you could just touch your screen? And there are a few other interesting items in the back of this car beyond the screen. A couple of them go back to the door panel. For one, right next to the hand-folded cloth and the Kirko glass, look at the speaker cover. It's just really, really cool looking. This car has 23 speakers in it as part of that executive package, and well, this is one of them. And speaking of luxury features, it's worth noting this car has mirrors that deploy from the ceiling. Of course it does, so you can drive down the road and look at yourself. I would expect nothing less from a vehicle with an executive package. Next up, moving on to the front, there are many quirks up here. I'm going to start with the dashboard lines. Now, take a look at the climate controls. You'll see that they have sort of lines going through them. That's pretty common, but these lines extend the entire way across the dashboard, which is a very, very cool look. It makes this thing look futuristic and kind of concept car-y. The interesting thing is the lines just sort of dead end when they get to the door. It would be cool if they continued them along the door panel, but I guess the door panel has other cool stuff. When the lines get closer to the steering wheel and the start-stop button, they sort of come up and reach a little point, which is their origin. It is a very cool look I haven't seen in any other car. And speaking of things I haven't seen before in any other car, check out the volume knob. Now this is, at first glance, a pretty standard volume knob. You push it, it turns on the stereo, you turn it, changes the volume, but it's also ringed by another little dial, and that's the tuner. So in one little dial and knob, Lexus has managed to get the radio tuner that changes the station, the volume, and the power. They're all together, they're in one. It's a very simplistic way of doing it that probably everyone else should copy if they're trying to minimize the number of buttons and switches in their interiors. Now, another interesting item worth mentioning is the sheer number of screens in this car. There's one in the gauge cluster, there's a center screen, you saw the one in back. There's also what appears to be a screen to the right of the center screen. I don't know if it's actually a screen, but it has these sort of decorative lines on it. It doesn't seem to ever turn off. It certainly looks like a screen, but all it ever displays are those lines. Seems like Lexus wants to put something there, but they can't quite figure out what just yet. Now, speaking of screens, it's worth noting that when you change the climate control temperature, it's not like in a lot of other cars, especially Japanese cars, where it looks like one of those old clock radios with the little button that can be at 8 or a 7 or a 6, depending on which lines are lit up. Instead, you get this nice high-quality screen, and you can see the temperature change as you roll the little temperature changing wheel. They have that on the driver and passenger side, and it's a nice look. Something else that's a nice look, this car has stitching all over the seats. Of course, it has stitching all over the dashboard. Of course, that's standard practice on luxury cars. Something I haven't seen, there is stitching around the gauge in the gauge cluster. That stitching you're rarely going to notice. Lexus absolutely didn't have to put it there, but they did because, well, it's Lexus and they're all about the details. Next up, we must discuss the shift lever, which is rather unusual. It seems like every new luxury car I get in has a stranger shift lever than the last one. In this shift lever, you have to sort of move it to the side to begin the gear engagement process, then push it up for reverse or down for drive. Then if you want to put it in park, it's that big button on top with a P on it. You push it and it turns blue. The days of traditional shift levers and cars sharing shift lever designs seem to be over. Everybody seems to have their own unique take on it. Another interesting item inside this car is under the passenger seat. If you move the passenger seat far enough back, you will encounter a little plastic piece that says on it frame number / VIN, and then there are a couple of arrows letting you know where to pull. I guess this is like an extra location of your VIN and frame number in case someone steals the car and tries to change the VIN on the windshield. Maybe the police will think they won't be smart enough to change the VIN down there, and they could check it and find the car's real VIN and return it to its rightful pampered owner. Next, we move on to these little knobs that stick out of the dashboard above the gauge cluster, kind of like horns. The one on the left turns off traction control if you push it in, pull it down, and it puts the car in snow mode. But the one on the right is way cooler. It changes the drive mode. And check this out. You put it down, it goes into sort of eco mode. You put it up and it goes into sport mode. But the interesting thing is what happens to the gauge cluster when you do it. Watch this. The gauge cluster is so configurable that it goes from sort of this like eco gauge cluster where you can monitor your energy usage to like the sporty one where it emphasizes the tachometer. It really is a cool look, and that's one of the benefits of these gauge cluster screens. They're just ultra configurable. And speaking of screens, since we're in them, we might as well start talking about the interesting quirks and features you'll find in the car's screens. I'm going to start with simply starting it. You turn on the car by pushing the start button, and then two movies play in the screens. It starts with the gauge cluster, and there's this little dancing circle thing, and eventually it says LS. Then you move over to the middle screen, and it has this Lexus graphic that's blue, and I don't really understand any of it. You guys make fun of me for calling these movies, but I mean, this is like 15 seconds of graphics that play when you start the car up. We're getting to kind of movie length here. But anyway, moving on to that infotainment screen, there are a couple of interesting little quirks I found playing around with it. One of which is, if you go into settings, you can delete your keyboard history. So if, for example, the car has learned some bad words that you've typed in during your ownership period, you can go in there and delete those bad words so that when your 12-year-old is riding with you, he or she won't see some of the things that you say. Next up, we move on to vehicle maintenance, and this is really incredible. You know how in your car a little light will come on and tell you when it's time to get an oil change? In this car, it reminds you of everything. When was the last time you changed your brake fluid, your washer fluid, your wipers, your brake pads, your air filter? Everything is on that screen, and it can send you a reminder and let you know that it's time to change any one of those myriad of items. And take a look in the bottom right corner. You can also set it to remind you of personal events. So if you want to add in a birthday or an anniversary, you can do that in your vehicle's maintenance reminder. Next up, you go into climate settings. It's all pretty standard, except there is one that says smog sensor sensitivity. In other words, the sensitivity of the smog sensor. Interestingly, there are 7 different levels of smog sensor sensitivity. What exactly does that do? Does it alert you that it's smoggy? And even if it is, what are you going to do about it? The navigation system settings are also just insane. You can choose basically everything and configure whatever you want. You can even choose state border guidance. That's one of the things you can turn on or off. It'll let you know if you're passing a state border or not. Maybe you don't care that you're entering Oregon. Well, then the car won't tell you, but if you do care, you can leave it on. There's also something in there called map flick. I get no idea what that means. Map flick, no idea. It could be anything. You can turn on or off. I would go with off. I don't know. And next up in that screen, if you move down to the center console next to the gear lever, you will see a little button with a seat on it. And press that button, and that button brings up all of the seat controls. Now, unlike the rear seats, the front seats have actual little buttons on the side you can use to control them, move them forward, backward, whatever. The seat control button, however, has additional seat control features. When you get that executive package, you have a 28-way power seat. So you control a few of those ways with the little buttons on the side of the seat, but a lot of the other stuff, the little adjustments, is through the screen. One other interesting item in there, that's how you access the heated seats. There's no heated seat button in this car. So if you want to turn on your heated seats, you got to press the seat button in the center console, then navigate over to heated seats, and then turn them on. It is a very cumbersome way to turn on heated seats. It should just be easy. One other interesting button next to the seat button is one that has a little graphic on it of a car, and then inside of it there's an arrow pointing up. This button controls something called access mode, and basically it allows you to lift the car a couple of inches to make it easier for you to get in and out. Lexus figures everybody's buying crossovers and SUVs because they're easier to get in and out of, so this car actually offers that ability even though it's a sedan. Next, we move on to the outside. I'm going to start with the front grille, which has been controversial to say the least. It's even been controversial with me personally. I actually like the front grille on many of Lexus's car models. On the sedans, I think it looks pretty good. I think where it starts to kind of go off the rails is when it's on some of the SUVs and it just becomes huge, especially when it's grafted onto certain SUVs where it just wasn't designed for, and you can tell that it's this weird afterthought that doesn't match the look of the rest of the car. But regarding the grille on this particular car, I happen to like it. It's one of the car models, which I think helps. The design was created with the grille in mind, which also helps, and it's bold and it's expressive and it's uniquely Lexus, for better or worse. And speaking of uniquely Lexus, one interesting thing I think worth mentioning about Lexus's recent designs, they've been very controversial, but in a world where everybody complains that all cars are starting to look the same, the old Audi Q5 becomes the new Audi Q5, you can barely tell that it changed, at least Lexus is doing something a little bit different. It's hard to sort of criticize car companies for being boring and then criticize Lexus for being different at the same time. Anyway, that's the grille. Moving on, another interesting item in the grille is the Lexus badge. You will see that it is blue. Here's an interesting little factoid for you. All Lexus hybrids have a little blue lined badge. All non-hybrid models have a regular Lexus badge. It's one easy way you can distinguish between a hybrid and a non-hybrid with a quick glance at the grille of any Lexus. Next up, moving on to the headlights, I think they have a very cool sharp design to them. The actual headlight bulbs themselves are fairly standard, but I really like these 3 little lines lines coming off the headlights and then going down to this little edge in front. It looks like futuristic whiskers on the headlights. It is a really cool design in my opinion, and I think it looks really neat on this car. But in my opinion, the taillights are even cooler. If you're on this side, you can see it's like 6 different L's all sort of going in a row, but that isn't the coolest part. The coolest part is if you come close and look at them, you can see it's like 3D. The L's are actually sort of on top of each other, and there's a cool depth to these taillights. It's really one of the coolest taillight designs I've seen. Next up, I'll start opening some stuff up, starting with the fuel door. Looks pretty standard, but it contains the single strangest warning label I have ever seen. If you read it, it says complete refueling within 30 minutes of opening the fuel filler door. If refueling more than 30 minutes after opening the fuel filler door, push the fuel filler door opener switch again, or fuel may overflow during the refueling process. In other words, if you open the fuel filler door and then you wait 30 minutes and don't put fuel in the car, for some reason it'll overflow. I have no idea why, and that really is one of the most bizarre warning labels I've ever seen. Next we move on to the trunk, which is surprisingly not really all that big, especially considering this car's sort of luxury sedan, give you everything you want mantra. I think it has to do with the hybrid batteries and stuff in there kind of taking up some space. One interesting item, it is of course a power trunk. You press the button and then it closes, or down here you press a button and then it opens up automatically. That's not all that surprising. I do like, however, the warning label in the trunk that says never allow a child to operate the power trunk opener and closer. Ah yes, that beautiful rite of passage in every Lexus LS owning family. When the son turns 18 and the father brings him into the garage and they look at the LS and the father says to him, "Son, you're no longer a child today. Now you can operate the power trunk closer." And finally, we move under the hood. Now, I don't know why I've saved this for last, but nonetheless, I have. This car is actually quite interesting under here. Even though it's a full-size $100,000 luxury sedan, competes with the S-Class and the 7 Series, Lexus isn't offering this with a V8. Right now, there are only 2 engine options. The base cars have a twin turbocharged V6 with 414 horsepower. This thing, the hybrid version, also has a V6, a hybrid V6 with 354 horsepower. The fuel economy rating on this is 23 miles per gallon city and 31 miles per gallon highway, which is just incredible given the size and weight of this car. It weighs 5,200 pounds. But to most people, maybe the most interesting thing under the hood is the fact that there's no engine under here. There is, of course, but Lexus has gone to great lengths to hide it under a lot of plastic, so it's a nice smooth look when you open up the hood, kind of owing to the type of people who buy Lexuses. They're probably not going to want to do a lot of vehicle maintenance themselves. So those are the quirks and features of the 2018 LS 500H, and now it's time to get behind the wheel of the ultimate Lexus sedan. All right, driving the LS. First impression is that it's very quiet, very serene in here. I just put it in sport. I'm going to drop the throttle. Wow, it actually moves really surprisingly quickly. Definitely wasn't expecting that. Definitely thought it would be a little bit of a letdown in that department. I mean, you think a car this size with a 6-cylinder, even if it's 350 horsepower, and even if it has the boost of the sort of instant torque from the hybrid motor, it's like, yeah, but how good could it be? Well, actually, it's pretty quick. It's no sports car, though. I think this is kind of luxury sedan quick from a few years ago. Now, all the luxury sedans feel like sports cars, and this isn't that. Very quiet sitting here at a stoplight. The only sound I hear is the my cooled seat cooling me. The outside the car, I really don't hear any cars going by. The ride quality is excellent, and it does a great job of taking care and really soaking up bumps. It's very good. I just drove the Rolls-Royce Phantom, and this thing seems like a letdown by comparison. It's sort of, that was probably the wrong car to do right before this one. But of course, that's $500,000. If you got that budget for a car, you shouldn't even be thinking about one of these. You should go buy a Phantom. If you don't have a $500,000 budget, it drives quite quite well. It feels a little bit more supple and a little bit more comfortable than the BMW M760 I drove. That car is designed a little bit more for handling. The suspension is a little bit firmer. The downside of this, of course, though, is that it isn't designed for handling. And so if you're in that world, even though Lexus is kind of pitching their sportiness over the last few years, the steering is still very light in this car. This is still more of sort of the old school luxury car. The materials quality in this car is excellent, absolutely top notch. There used to be a day when you could say that Japanese cars, were more plasticky than the Germans and all that, and that's just not true anymore. The Japanese cars, you can argue all day about sportiness and styling and road manners, but interior quality is absolutely up to the standard of the Europeans. The interior of this car is beautiful, with wonderful materials. Everything feels great to touch. Nothing rattles, nothing squeaks. This is every bit as good as BMW or Mercedes-Benz inside. I am surprised, especially in sport mode, with just how sporty it feels when you accelerate. And also, the steering and handling is not as bad as I was expecting. The steering is vague and light, as is the Lexus way. But the handling is pretty good. I mean, the car feels nice and secure. It wallows a little bit, it body rolls a little bit. At the end of the day, it's sort of exactly what I was expecting, in the sense that it is, as luxurious as Mercedes, BMW. This is on a level above the Genesis G90. There's no question about it. It feels quieter, it feels smoother, more comfortable. However, in terms of Mercedes, BMW, it doesn't quite handle like those cars. The way that it exceeds my expectations, interior quality, I would go as far as to say this is probably the highest quality luxury sedan interior right now at this price point. And also acceleration is better than I thought, considering it's only a 6-cylinder with only 350 horsepower. So that's the 2018 Lexus LS 500H. $120,000 is a lot of money, but then this is a lot of car. It's incredibly, supremely comfortable. It's loaded with technology. It's nice to look at, and it's surprisingly quick. It also gets better gas mileage than a V6 Camry, even though it's longer, wider, larger inside, heavier, faster, and more powerful. If you're looking for a luxury sedan and you're not obsessed with sporty handling, which you're probably not if you're looking for a luxury sedan, and if you're not obsessed with having that Mercedes-Benz 3-pointed star up front, then this is the luxury sedan to get. And now it's time to give it a Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, I personally think the LS is handsome, but its design will be controversial, especially with the Lexus grille, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds, which gives it a 5 out of 10. Handling is fine, secure, and better than I expected, but it's still a large sedan, a large Lexus sedan, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Cool factor is somewhat high, as it's a cool new luxury sedan, but the Lexus brand doesn't inspire quite the same level of excitement as the European rivals, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Same for importance. This is a pricey luxury car, so it's somewhat important, but it gets a 5 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 26 out of 50, not surprisingly behind sporty luxury cars like the BMW M760i and the Porsche Panamera Turbo. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. The LS has everything and then some, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Comfort is excellent with wonderful soft seats and great ride quality, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Quality is very high. This car has a truly excellent interior and notorious Lexus reliability, and it gets an impressive 10 out of 10, becoming only the second car ever to get that score. The first was Lexus's LC 500 Coupe. Practicality is fine. Trunk space is surprisingly small at 15.1 cubic feet, which would give it a 4, but due to the LS 500H's excellent fuel economy, I'm bumping that up to a 5 out of 10. Finally, there's value. The LS 500H is massively expensive, and it'll lose value quickly. I'm giving it a 6 out of 10, though I think I'd bump that up if it were a non-hybrid model priced a little closer to the starting MSRP in the $80,000 range. Still, added up, and the total daily score is 40 out of 50, which places it near the very top, behind only the new Lincoln Navigator. Add it all up, and the Doug score is 66 out of 100, which is good for a pure luxury car. In the daily score, it beats out luxury sedans like the BMW M760i and Panamera Turbo, but it can't touch those cars in weekend score, so it ends up just a little behind them overall.